Hey Colts fans, I'm JJ Stankevitz and welcome into another episode of the Colts Show. We are an Indianapolis Colts podcast and we are presented by our friends at Microsoft Surface Copilot Plus PC. Just me today on the pod. We're going to talk about a topic that I think is widely known but maybe not deeply understood. Consider this your refresher on the franchise tag. Before we get into that though, if this is the first time you're watching or listening to the show, please rate, review, and subscribe. You can get us on Indianapolis Colts Podcast, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever your podcast platform of choice is. You can watch us on YouTube by subscribing to @Colts. You can also subscribe to our feed for the Colts Show. We got a lot of good stuff on the feed over the last couple of weeks. I had a great chat with Colts offensive line coach Tony Sparano Jr. Learned a lot about O-line play, about coaching philosophy, and then we pivoted to a story about the time a plane crashed into the Colts stadium after a playoff game. I think we might be the only football podcast out there that could pivot from a plane crash to something technical like the franchise tag in successive episodes. But that's why I love doing this show. The goal of this show is to talk about all things Colts and keep our fans and our listeners and our viewers up to date and informed and interested in everything about the team and what is going on with it, whether it's past, present, or future. All right, so let's talk about the franchise tag. Because on Tuesday, the day we're recording this, it's sort of the soft launch to the NFL offseason. It's like 8 days after the Super Bowl, and all of a sudden now teams that have been pending unrestricted free agents can place the franchise tag or the transition tag on them. What that means is it's a mechanism, it's a lever to pull for teams to say, we want to keep this guy around. Teams have until 4 p.m. on Tuesday, March 3rd. So this is about 2 weeks here that teams have to decide, do we want to do something to keep a player around? A couple of things to get into here. So we all have seen the franchise tag, certainly. It is it's this kind of lever that when you tag someone, for the most part, you're going to keep that guy. You don't need to, there are two different types of franchise tags. You don't really need to worry about the exclusive franchise tag. That's the tag that you would give someone to prevent them from negotiating with other teams. I think pretty much you'd only use that on if say for some reason Josh Allen was about to hit free agency and the Bills couldn't work out a deal with him, they'd probably use the exclusive franchise tag. That's to the level, you would use that if receiving 2 first-round picks in return for a guy is not fair compensation for losing him. So it's a very high bar to clear. Not many teams use it. It's only been used 4 times since 2014. I think the most recent one might have been Dak Prescott. The more common tag is the non-exclusive franchise tag. This means that when you're on the tag, a player on the tag can go negotiate with other teams, and they can agree to an offer sheet. But that team has to A, have the cap space necessary to sign that guy at that moment. B, they would have to give up their next 2 first-round picks to receive that player. And C, this doesn't happen. You don't see guys do this. The last player to have the non-exclusive franchise tag placed on him and then change teams via a free agency offer sheet was Joey Galloway in 2000 when he went from the Seahawks to the Cowboys. So that doesn't really happen. If you get the franchise tag put on you, you're probably going to stay with the team that did it. Sometimes you see tag and trades. Those are also pretty rare. I think that was L'Jarius Sneed in 2024 when he went from the Chiefs to the Titans, but not something that you see very frequently. So why am I talking about this? The Colts have a couple of guys who are impending unrestricted free agents who could be candidates for the tag. What you're looking for is guys who performed at a really high level going into their year where they're going to be unrestricted free agents. So I think you probably know, you saw the thumbnail if you're on YouTube, you probably know who those 2 guys are. It's Daniel Jones and it's Alec Pierce. Those are the 2 guys who broadly fit the parameters of players who have had the franchise tag put on them previously. There's also the transition tag. And this is where I want to kind of get into this one. Because the franchise tag, the valuation for that for a quarterback is $47 million. So if you put the tag on Daniel Jones and he signs that tender, he's earning a guaranteed $47 million salary in 2026. If you put the franchise tag on Alec Pierce and he signs it, he's earning a guaranteed $28.8 million in 2026. Now, these are from over the cap. These could be changed when the salary cap is officially set, but the cap has gone up again, so the franchise tag values go up. What I want to get into here is the transition tag, because I think this is the most interesting one, and this is the one that is the least understood. I actually have some kind of direct experience with the transition tag. It's only been used 6 times in the last 10 years. The Steelers used it in 2014 on Jason Worlds. The Browns used it also in 2014 on center Alex Mack. The Dolphins used it in 2015 on tight end Charles Clay. Here's where it comes in for me. The Bears used it in 2018 on cornerback Kyle Fuller. So here's what happened when they put the transition tag on Kyle Fuller. Kyle Fuller was a guy who underperformed first-round expectations for the first couple years he was in the NFL. Then all of a sudden in 2017, he played a full season. He was banged up too. Played a full season. He played at a really high level going into his year as an unrestricted free agent. The Bears said, we don't want to put the franchise tag on him because that maybe removes a little bit of flexibility in negotiating with him. Let's put the transition tag on him. At this point, it hadn't been used in 3 years. So what it meant was Kyle Fuller became an unrestricted free agent. But the Bears, by putting the transition tag on him, could then match whatever contract Kyle Fuller would sign. So Kyle Fuller went and he signed, quote unquote, with the Green Bay Packers, who gave him a 4-year deal. I think it was like $56 million or something like that. The Bears, upon seeing what Kyle Fuller's market was, said, yeah, we're going to match that. We're going to keep him. So Kyle Fuller stayed in Chicago. So it's essentially this mechanism where a team can say, yeah, we like this guy. We don't really know what his market value is. We don't want to put the franchise tag on him because that's going to set too high of a bar for the starting point for negotiations and average annual value of a contract. So, like, if you put the franchise tag on a wide receiver, potentially, that receiver's representation is going to say, okay, we're going to start at $28.8 million per year. And maybe it goes down a little bit, maybe it goes up a little bit, but that's almost the starting point. The transition tag costs you less, but you don't get anything in return, and you do risk losing the player in a way that you don't with the franchise tag. So the transition tag for a quarterback is 40.7, it's really about 40.8 million according to Over the Cap. For a wide receiver, it's about 25 million. So that's a big difference in average annual value. If you think about it this way, that $3.8 million difference or $7 million difference, that's like a rotational defensive lineman or potentially even a starter somewhere on your team that you don't have the flexibility to get between those two tags. So with this, if the Colts were to use the transition tag on either Daniel Jones or Alec Pierce, you can only use one. You can't use the franchise tag and the transition tag. You have to pick between the franchise tag or the transition tag, and you can only use it once per offseason. That would allow them to, and this is all hypothetical. This is no inside information. This is more informative. If the Colts were to use the transition tag on one of those guys, and then they were to go sign an offer sheet somewhere else, the Colts could say, okay, so we weren't able to figure out what his market value was, or we weren't able to work with his representation on what we thought fair market was. The market has now dictated what his value is. Yes, we're going to go ahead and match that. No, we're going to decline and match that. It's pretty rare for a team to decline to match when they use the franchise tag. Looking at it, only 2 players played on the transition tag. Kenyon Drake in 2020, which was kind of a weird one there, and then Jason Worlds in 2014. So it's really rare for a guy to be given the transition tag and then not go out and sign an extension. Kyle Fuller, Charles Clay, Alex Mack, and Kyle Duggar in 2024 from the Patriots. Those guys all got contract extensions. They all signed them with the team that offered them the transition tag, So they didn't leave. I think it would be pretty rare for a player to leave on the transition tag. It could happen, certainly, but it's sort of the right of first refusal. Let's see what the market gives you and then go from there. If the Colts use the franchise tag, it's just like the transition tag. It's going to be a placeholder for an extension. This is what the Colts did in 2024 with Michael Pittman Jr. when they used the franchise tag on Pitt, and then I think it went right up to the deadline. and then right to the franchise tag deadline. And then about a week later, they signed Pitt to an extension. That's probably somewhere in the range. If you see a team use the franchise tag, most of the time it's that placeholder for an extension. Same probably for the transition tag. It's just a little bit different there. The question then for the Colts is how do they view Jones and Pierce? Are they going to try to get something done before free agency with these guys? I think, we heard from Chris Ballard back in January. We're going to hear from him again next week at the NFL Combine, but the messaging around Daniel Jones was, we want him back. We got to work it out. There's a business part of this, but we want him back. And then Chris Ballard said directly, Alec Pierce is a priority. And why wouldn't be? He had a 1,000-yard season with it was maybe the most efficient 1,000-yard season since Deshaun Jackson back in, I think it was 2012 or something like that, where he reached 1,000 yards on 50-something catches. It was crazy. The season he had was nuts. For what he did and how he was used within the offense, it was so successful. He was such a good player, such an unselfish player, a guy who certainly you want to keep around, but when that happens, there are going to be a lot of other teams that probably are going to be interested in that guy. So let's kind of reset here. I wouldn't expect, just because the window's open, I would not expect anything to happen imminently. I looked this up, and only 4 players have been tagged in the month of February over the last 7 off seasons. That would be L'Jarius Sneed in 2014 by the Chiefs, Washington defensive tackle Daron Payne in 2022, Robbie Gould, the kicker, he got the franchise tag in 2019 in February, and then Miami tagged wide receiver Jarvis Landry in February in 2018. No players had the transition tag placed on him in February since at least 2014. So this is probably going to come right down to the wire. I think it was 30 minutes before the tag window closed that the Colts used it on Pittman, because what most teams are doing is saying, okay, yeah, we have this lever we can pull, but we don't want to pull it until we're sure we can't get a deal done before the tag window closes. So it's probably not something, even though this is, again, I kind of called it the soft launch to the offseason, it's probably not something you're going to see for a couple of weeks. You get to the Combine, you're going to hear a lot of chatter. You're going to see a lot of predictions of where guys could go. And I think then it's the Tuesday after the Combine. That's when this likely will happen if the Colts use it. The Colts have not been a team that have used it a lot in their history. Before they used it on Michael Pittman Jr. in 2024, the last guy the Colts tagged was Pat McAfee in 2013. That's because the Colts traditionally have signed their guys to extensions. They've drafted, developed, and extended before guys go to free agency. So, you remember Quentin Nelson got that extension a day before the 2022 season started. So he did not make it to free agency. The Colts signed Jonathan Taylor during the season in 2023. Bernard Ryman just got an extension last summer, right around at the start of training camp. The Colts usually don't do this. But in the case of Pierce and Jones, it is a little bit different in that Jones came to the Colts on a 1-year deal, kind of this 1-year prove-it deal, which he proved over the first 10 games of the season. And really, let's just take into account his whole season. He finished top 8 in the NFL in completion percentage, passer rating, yards per attempt. He had a really good season. I think you can look at the first 10 games and say he had a great season up until he had the fracture in his leg and then the Achilles. For Alec Pierce, his first 2 years with the Colts were not very productive, right? We know the whole story where he kind of struggled to carve out a consistent role within the Colts offense. The Colts then draft A.D. Mitchell in 2024. Chris Ballard's told the story a lot where Alec goes into his office and says, what does this mean for me? And Ballard says, nothing, you go compete. Well, Alec went out and competed his butt off, had a really good season in 2024, built upon it into a really, really good season in 2025. He has led the NFL in yards per reception in 2 consecutive years now, over 20 yards per catch. The play that he's brought to the Colts, the unselfish attitude he's brought, the downfield blocking. I just saw the highlight of Jonathan Taylor's run against the Falcons again, the 80-something yarder, where Alex all the way down there blocking. It's those are the kind of players you want to have on your team. Those are, of course, the kind of players other teams want to have on their team. So that's how we got here with those 2 guys. Is Pierce probably he wasn't at that point where he was going to get an extension after the 24 season. So you let him go through 25. Well, now he built on that, and he proved it. So now maybe he's in that consideration. Again, I'm not speaking with any inside info here, guys. This is more broadly the type of players that teams look to tag. So out of the Colts impending free agents, it's really Jones and Pierce. So again, I wouldn't anticipate anything happening immediately. This is probably closer closer to that deadline on Tuesday, March 3rd. But the Colts in this window now, this is when you start seeing those extension negotiations start to ramp up. This is when you start to see, hey, this guy's going to become a free agent. Let's try to get something done. And if we can't, maybe we go to the tag. So we'll see. I mean, it's going to be really interesting how these two guys play out, because I think when you look at this Colts offseason, it kind of starts with Jones and Pierce and what shakes out with those two guys. And then you go to the rest of the needs on the roster. But taking care of quarterback, obviously, that's a priority for any team. And then taking care, figuring out what to do with a 1,000-yard receiver who's going to become a free agent is another priority. So that makes a ton of sense. Just real quick, let's run down the Colts' impending free agents kind of before we get out of here. This is in alphabetical order, so bear with me here. Running back Amir Abdullah, tight end Mo Alley Cox, safety Nick Cross, defensive end Samson Ebicom, defensive tackle Neville Gallimore, linebacker Buddy Johnson, defensive tackle Eric Johnson, quarterback Daniel Jones, cornerback Chris Lamons, defensive end Tyquan Lewis, safety George Odom, tight end Drew Ogletree, defensive end Kwity Paye, wide receiver Alec Pierce, center Danny Pinter, linebacker Jermaine Pratt, tackle Braden Smith, safety Rodney Thomas II, wide receiver Laquan Treadwell, and defensive tackle Chris Wormley. So a lot of decisions to be made on those guys. You have some guys who played a lot of snaps for the Colts in there. Mo Alley Cox is one of the longest tenured members of the team. Braden Smith has played a ton of good football for the Colts over his time. Tyquan Lewis, very valuable defensive lineman for this team. A lot of guys who are, going to be interesting decisions on. All right. Before we get out of here, just if you have any questions about this, if any of this didn't make sense, drop a comment in the YouTube comments here. Send me a message on Instagram, on X. I'd be happy to kind of answer anything else. Again, think about the tags as a placeholder for an extension and a mechanism to say, we want to keep this guy around. If the Colts don't use the tag on either of these guys, if they don't use either tag on either Jones or Pierce, it does not mean they don't want these guys back. It just means maybe we think we can get something done still, or maybe we get something done before free agency even opens. We'll see. The last thing here, this was kind of just a fun exercise. So there have been 7 players in Colts history, or 7 instances, I should say, in Colts history of using the franchise tag. I already told you Michael Pittman Jr. and Pat McAfee. So there have been 5 other instances of using the franchise tag, and this is kind of fun. This is a little trip down memory lane here. So think about, who do you think those 5 players are, or the 5 instances are? Because technically it's actually 4 players. So think about it. One of them's Peyton Manning, who the Colts tagged in 2004 and in 2011. One of them is Robert Mathis, who the Colts tagged in 2012. Another is Dwight Freeney, who the Colts tagged in 2007. And then the last one is tight end Marcus Pollard. He was the first player the Colts ever gave the franchise tag to in 2001. The collective bargaining agreement has changed since, really, for all these guys. It changed in 2011, but a lot of these guys are still under contracts that were agreed to in the previous CBA. The rookie wage scale is the thing here, and that was changed in 2011, so players drafted after 2011 were subject to 4 years for rounds 2 through 7, and then 4 years plus the 5th-year option for first-rounders. So Pittman's the only guy the Colts have used the tag on in the new CBA with the wage scale, the way it's been updated, really. There have also been 3 players who have got the transition tag in Colts history. This is a grab bag of 90s guys. Linebacker Tony Bennett in 1998, cornerback Ray Buchanan in 1997, and linebacker Quentin Coriat in 1996. So not something the Colts have used in going on almost 30 years here, 28 years. But we'll see. We'll see if the Colts decide to go that route. A lot of info here, I know. A lot of direct-to-camera, a lot of just me talking. We're going to be back with a guest next week on the Colts Show, and then we've got a ton of stuff that we got planned for the NFL Combine. We're going to have a show a week after the Combine previewing free agency. After that, we tape. So the episodes come out on Tuesdays, right? So we're going to do a free agency preview next Tuesday on on March 3rd on the Colts Show. Then on the March 10th episode, that's like right in the middle of the heat of free agency. We're going to pivot on that one and do a bit of some draft talk on that one, because it's going to be hard to kind of immediately react to whatever bullets are flying during free agency. That's what Instant Reaction is for, one of our other podcast offerings here. Casey Valier and Bill Brooks got you covered if there is breaking news outside of this window of our Tuesday publishing dates for this podcast. But really looking forward to getting down to the Indiana Convention Center, talking ball with a ton of people who come by our radio podcast desk down there. If you're down at the Combine, come say hi. We'd be happy to chat, talk ball. I'll be kind of roaming around downtown Indianapolis, making my way down from my home in Carmel, spending a lot of time in downtown Indy this week. I can't wait. It's one of my favorite weeks of the year. You gain so much knowledge. You gain so much insight. You talk so much football. What could be better? And, I'll probably have a steak or two down at St. Elmo's. So, anyways, that's going to do it for this episode of The Colts Show. We are presented by Microsoft Surface Copilot Plus PC. Talk to you next week here on The Colts Show, an Indianapolis Colts podcast. So long.